11 minutes to the hour, you're listening to Paris Live PM on Radio France International. Well, by the year 2020, as many as 6 to 7 Africans in 10 will own a smartphone. That's according to the professional services firm PricewaterhouseCoopers, which has published a study looking at how businesses and policymakers in Africa can use digital technology to help the continent become an economic world power. The report is called Disrupting Africa, Riding the Wave of the Digital Revolution, and it tells us that untapped demand is driving advances all over Africa. It also explains how technology is reshaping society. With us to talk about Africa's digital revolution is Pierre-Antoine Balu, who works with PricewaterhouseCoopers, specialising in business transformation and emerging markets. You're very welcome to the programme.
Thank you so much.
Now, this report essentially is written for businesses, policymakers. It's about capitalising on market opportunities in Africa and advancing African economies. And at the same time, it's about improving the lives of ordinary people. First off, can you tell us about the types of technology that's driving Africa's digital transformation?
Yeah, through this report and this study, we wanted to provide an overview of what are the main technologies impacting the continent and changing and disrupting the continent. So we talk about drones in order to send medication, for instance, in Rwanda, when you want to avoid to have like a 2-day journey by car in order to send blood, for instance, in case of emergency. So you can use drones, for instance. We talk about, of course, about mobile payment and an electronic wallet, which is, of course, a game changer for the banking industry on the continent. We talk about blockchain, which is a technology a little bit more blurry, I would say, but nevertheless, the idea is to create some trust in terms of data that you will get, for instance, on land certificates, to make sure that, for instance, you are the real legal owner and that the it's an authentic paper and document that you can provide to the authorities. These are the kind of technologies we do observe on the continent. I think one of the key messages of this report is to say that, Africa is a kind of a laboratory. It's boiling. There's a lot of initiatives, a lot of constraints, but because there are a lot of constraints, there's a lot of innovation.
Sure. Okay. I just want to seize on one word that you used there, which was disruption. That's one of the key terms that's bandied about. Digital disruption. On the surface, it sounds a little bit negative. I'm sure that's not the case. So, what exactly does it mean?
Well, it's a matter of business model. When we talk about disruption, it's using technology to make a change in terms of business model and to provide a service or a solution to clients and our customers at a cheaper price or with a better access. The best example is, of course, mobile payment. You are a bank. A classical bank would have branches, and this has a cost, of course, and that explains, I would say, the high cost or the cost structure of the bank, and that reflects in the prices of the bank. If you are a fintech, which is online, providing mobile banking, for instance, therefore you can, have a more aggressive price strategy, and it's of course to the benefits of the consumer.
Now, let's look at some of the on-the-ground benefits of the digital revolution for ordinary people in Africa. Now, the report tells us that Africa has the highest mobile growth rate in the world. Now, some communities in sub-Saharan Africa are more easily able to access a mobile phone network than they are to access clean water. Tell us, how does technology help if we don't have the basics?
Well, it's true that, it will not solve all the issues, definitely. However, it can help, to bring education, for instance, in very remote places through e-learning solutions or tutorials that you can send to teachers in remote places so they can, improve the quality of the tuition. That's one example. For the health, well, you can have services where, through SMS, very basic SMS, you can provide, advices to mothers who are in childcare and they don't know how to handle, a fever for their kids and so on. So you get access to a doctor remotely. And that is, I think, a key benefit. With a relationship with the government, of course, to pay taxes or to pay your bills, to get access to electricity. We know, we talk about smart grids. Solar panels in order to get access to electricity. You can pay that with your cell phone, and that is a game changer also.
Now, South Africa and Nigeria are the biggest economies in Africa. I think Kenya has the fastest internet speed. So these places are obvious hotspots for investors. Many African countries have slow internet that's very expensive. Places like Somalia, Niger, Ethiopia, the DRC. Has the digital revolution reached these places?
Well, you're right. There is a lot of discrepancies from one country to another, and even in one country from one region to another. And there is especially a lot of a huge gap between urban areas and rural areas. I think that there are two different things. The technology itself, for instance, most of the internet is through 3G, 4G, and so therefore, there are obviously some kind of infrastructure needed. However, you can have some solutions through very basic SMS and very basic channels, and that doesn't require, high-speed internet. So you can have disruptive solutions through basic technological systems.
Now, talking about some discrepancies, you mentioned there are rural areas and urban areas. Another discrepancy is the wealth gap. Now, strong economic growth in Africa has seen a massive increase of the numbers of millionaires, and there's been concern that the rich are getting richer, poverty is deepening. How do we address this disparity of wealth and ensure that the benefits of growth are more evenly spread across the continent?
Once again, there is no silver bullet, and I don't think that technology will solve all the issues. However, if I take an example of financial inclusion, definitely technology, and especially mobile payment, mobile banking, is going to be a very useful tool in order to involve populations within the economy, or to make sure that they gain trust into the system. Because beforehand you got an issue of trust. The people don't trust banks, for instance. They don't trust, authorities and so on. So through these new channels and through their mobile, they can gain trust sometimes, and they discover new services. So this thing is something very positive, I think.
Now, I also want to ask you about this emerging so-called middle market in Africa, which has one of the fastest growing middle classes in the world. I think there are 2 billion inhabitants, thus potential consumers. How central are they to driving this growth and change in Africa?
So it's 2 billion in 2050. So that it's a multiplication by 2 in the next 30 years. You're right. And so there is a lot of debates for the economists and the demographs regarding, the number of the middle class population. Is it 350? The African Development Bank uses that number, so that's why we use it also as a benchmark. But definitely there is a population which is becoming more urban. There is a shift towards the cities, and we know more or less that the forecast is about to have 50% of the total population of Africa living in cities in 2050, which is 1 billion people. And this urbanized, population will be young, and they will be digital natives, so they will be using technologies, and for them it's going to be absolutely natural.
Is this middle class the same in Africa as we would understand a middle class to be in other countries?
No, of course it's different from Europe or the US. However, they are consuming, and they can, also make a credit, for instance, for a short-term period. They can put some money aside, and they have, I would think. they want to consume for they are waiting for new things to come over.
Okay, that's interesting. It does make for fascinating reading. Unfortunately, we ran out of time, so our thanks there to Pierre-Antoine Balu from PricewaterhouseCoopers. And you can get that report online, Disrupting Africa, Riding the Wave of the Digital Revolution. That brings us to the end of our show. Thanks for being with us here on Paris Live PM.